Alright, today I'm going to talk about gun control, and boy, what a mess that is, huh? Everybody has their own feelings and views on it and think they're right, but the truth is, not many people are. So, start with a little bit of my background with guns and gun control. I've hunted since I was old enough to hunt, and I believe guns, are a really important part of our society. For a lot of the country, there's still people out here who rely on the meat from animals that we can kill to sustain life, and not everybody believes the grocery store is where all our stuff comes from. I till the land in my backyard and plant vegetables, and I go out and I hunt and I fish and bring home meat. And I save a lot of money and recommend a lot of people do it. What that brings me to is, ownership of guns is a really important responsibility, even for hunters. And that's part of it, is that there doesn't need to be legislation for it. But what I would say is, just responsible gun ownership. Any person who truly owns guns and knows what they're talking about will admit that owning a gun isn't something you should ever take lightly. Let's take, for example, where I live in this city. I've had someone break into my garage and steal my tools and stuff. Had I been storing some kind of gun out there, they could have gotten it and then done something horrible with it. But that's why I keep my guns in my house and in a safe, secure location. And there's one always by me, usually, just because, I have a carry license to carry firearms, and I keep one on me. But as far as my beliefs in ownership, we should keep our guns locked up. If you have kids, you should put trigger locks on them. If kids are going to be over and you don't have kids, then you should probably keep your guns in a safe, stored away location separate from the ammunition. Just keep a general eye on things. As far as using guns for protection goes, the truth of the matter is it'd be nice if the cat wasn't already out of the bag when it comes to guns and things like that, and people owning them and the invention of them, period. But they're invented, and they're there, and no amount of legislation can take away the fact that they will be on the streets. To be honest with you, guns can be manufactured in a small machine shop, like with limited capability. You can manufacture a gun, maybe a smoothbore rifle. Not everybody's going to have the experience to do rifling or anything, but regardless, guns can always be manufactured or created. So there's no way to go back on. Once something's invented, that's it. The cat's out of the bag. My views on the violence of guns is that most of the time, the gun violence comes about from either disturbed people, as we know, or I feel a lot of gun violence comes from kids who get guns from people that should know better and not leave their guns around, or kids get guns from their parents, but their parents never exposed them to the proper use and handling of a firearm. I could never aim a gun at a person and shoot unless my life or the life of someone I love was in imminent danger. There's just no doubt about it. Any sane person would say the same thing. It's the violence part is really complicated, but I'm going to get a little bit more into that later. I think why people fear guns is the same reason people fear a garden spider that could never do them any harm, or anything else people fear. Fear is simply irrational judgment based on unknowns. It's a way for people to protect themselves because they don't have the knowledge to know otherwise. So people take guns and they don't know about them, and anybody that's shot guns or knows guns isn't afraid of them. But it's the people who haven't handled firearms and don't know a thing about them that are afraid of them. And so these people will, automatically assume these are bad items, when really they're no different than a screwdriver, hammer, or anything else. They're simply a tool. They're maybe a tool for killing, in a way, or depending, on what you're after. To me, my firearms that aren't used for hunting are simply used for recreation. I have semi-automatic military rifles with 40-round magazines, and I never plan to walk into a school with one for sure, but I do like to go out on a weekend and load up a couple mags and start shooting, gallon milk jugs filled with water and clay targets and things like that. So, I mean, and make it a kind of a sport out of marksmanship with my friends and stuff like that, but I never have any plan of using it. But more of that's coming later. I think some of the history of America with guns is kind of important too. We have the glorified view of the American West as the rootin' tootin', shoot 'em out. Everybody had a gun, everybody fired guns, and everybody died at the hand of a gun, when you'll find that to be pretty untrue. Although it was a violent time, the glorified spaghetti western view on guns in the Wild West is a little, if you do the history research on it, it's a little exaggerated. So most gunslingers who died by guns were shot in the back in a saloon by a man that they had wronged or in some way. So usually actually in recorded history, there's never been that walk 20 paces at the strike of noon, turn and fire kind of situation. There's never actually been a documentation of that happening in history, any kind of that gun play. So war and things like that, let's get real here. We're basically monkeys with overly developed brains, but we still have the same animal urge for protection of our land and what we conceive to be our territories by an outside threat. And you have the general problem with religion, which has caused most of the war there is, and then some wars have been caused by mass psychosis, brought on by a need for something new. Take, for example, right after the Weimar Republic in Germany, when there was no money and you needed a wheelbarrow full of the money just to buy a loaf of bread because of inflation. The National Socialist Party came along and said, we have the answer, and in a way they did, but then it became very apparent very quickly that the answer wasn't exactly good, and even though it brought some amount of prosperity to the country, the ends don't always justify the means. So, I've heard an argument, going with the history of guns is people saying like, well, they just should have never been invented anyways. Well, let's get one thing straight. The invention of the firearm from the human standpoint was an inevitability. From the second we put a piece of stone on the end of a stick, sharpened it, and called it a spear, the invention of the firearm was already, that fate was sealed. There's no way to turn back that clock. And wishful thinking and idealism don't get us anywhere in a debate when it comes to something like gun control, saying they should have never been invented, or they're whatever. That it's just not even an issue. It's just not a point. So, and a little bit with the history too. The NRA's been dogged a lot, and I understand they're a big political contributor to conservative ideology and all that, but really the NRA was invented by two Union generals who, after the Civil War, wanted to find a way to make sure slaves didn't have recourse taken against them or actions taken against them by groups such as the KKK. So these two generals formed this thing called the National Rifle Association and helped slaves attain firearms to protect themselves. That's why it was made. The NRA started with the purest and holiest of intentions, if you could say it that way. And so I don't see them as some big scary bad guys, although they haven't acted with the best judgment in some cases and instances. Regardless, they're not some evil organization or anything. And what I wanted to do here also was then go over a little bit more about ownership with, like, the guns you choose to own. Like me, for my personal everyday carry, I'm a big dude, so I carry a pretty big gun. I carry a Springfield XDM 45. But what I think is really cool is the features on it for safety. Guns are safer than they've ever been. The old black powder gun, you could pull the trigger and you'd sit there, and if the pan didn't catch right away, you just had to hold her steady until it caught, and that could take up to a minute sometimes. So the guns have become much, much safer compared to the old touch-and-go black powder type style weapon. Whereas you have a casing and a primer and an enclosed cartridge and all that, and it's pretty much guaranteed to fire almost every time. And then you have modern guns like this 45, where to shoot, there's a button here that has to be indented, so it's got to be pressed correctly. There's a small pin you can see shining on the back of the gun, which when it's out, it means it's cocked. Then there's this little lever right above my finger there, which sticks up when there's a round in the chamber, which currently there isn't. And then also, if you take a look at the trigger mechanism, if you pull, if this isn't pulled, it can't go off. But then also, you have to have your finger the whole way across the trigger because it's like kind of like a double trigger mechanism. So they try to make these guns as safe as possible so they can't just go off any old time and hurt somebody. So modern firearms become truly, really safe and to be honest with you, they're very expensive. No one's just going to go out and buy this. This is a $700 gun. No one's just going to go out and make some purchase on a whim to kill somebody and buy a $700 handgun. They're just not going to do it. If anything, they're going to go buy some little, 2022 or something that's dirt cheap. Not a military grade firearm like this, with which is illegal in California because the magazine holds 13 rounds, and why, I don't know. Some of the safest guns there are more military style guns, but so that's just showing part of the safety features on modern weapons and how they're safer than they've ever been as far as personal handling and stuff. Now to get into the real tragic part of it all, the gun violence, and really get into that. In urban areas, there's a lot of gun violence. I don't blame the guns. I blame the people, and I always have. I can set a loaded gun next to me, and there's been a loaded gun next to me for years, and it's never hurt a single soul. It's never done a thing on its own. It's never killed a living creature. Does it have the capability to? Yes. But so does a baseball bat, or a kitchen knife, or, pretty honestly, my own fist probably has the ability to kill some human beings. And, but we don't try to legislate against them. In the urban setting, I think most of the gun violence is pretty much tied to the fact that there's a lot of drug abuse and drug dealing and gangs and things like that, where you take these disadvantaged kids and they watch their parents do things that they shouldn't be watching them do, and they don't always have mentors or ways to outlet their frustrations, and they don't always feel safe, and they have a culture of music and things like that, which I'm definitely not against, and I'm not for censorship, but they have a culture and a music where violence is sometimes glorified and considered okay. So the urban violence, there are some innocent bystanders that do get harmed, absolutely, in shootings and stuff, but 9 times out of 10, it's 2 drug dealers or gang members shooting each other. And to be honest with you, I don't feel bad for either party. You signed up for that. You knew what you were getting into when you do that. It's a stupid decision, a very costly decision with drastic consequences when you go the wrong route. As far as like mass shootings and things like that, look, we take our children anymore and we coddle them from a young age, and we tell them, oh my god, you're the best thing that's ever happened, you can do no wrong, here's a participation trophy even though you suck at the sport you're playing, everything you do is right, yada yada yada, you're so special, you're a snowflake, you're unique, you're awesome. And then they get into school and they find out, oh well, I'm not that good at this, or boy, kids are mean, and they've been told their whole life that they're some kind of special snowflake, and they find out they're just a random individual in a sea of other snowflakes, which makes them mediocre. And sometimes people's psyche can't handle that. So you have these kids that go into their schools, and the only thing they can think to do is just show absolute power, and this goes back to, anthropologically speaking, our natural primate instinct of banging our chest and wanting to be the top dog. So the absolute power is just to kill them. And so these school shootings happen because, you know, these people become, they're either, well, the obvious, psychologically damaged, or have some kind of deficiency psychologically where they're unbalanced. But then you also have these kids, like I believe happened in Columbine, where they're these kids from, you know, suburban neighborhoods who grew up believing they're special, and they find out they're really not. They're pretty mediocre, and they can't handle it because they've never had to face the harsh reality of failure in the real world, which that's what the real world's full of. It's virtually all failure. Very few successes in your life, but see, what they never learned from their parents is what we don't teach our kids anymore in this modern society of coddling the self-esteem, is that without the failure, the successes don't really matter because they have no value. It's kind of like being handed things and being spoiled because you don't have to work for it. You don't really see its true value. So I think that's a lot of it. And these kids just can't handle the fact that there's nothing special about them. So they freaking lose it, don't know what to do, and they're like, hey, because it doesn't happen that often. It's just these few kids, and some of these kids just say, hey, you know what? I'll show them. And they grab a gun. And then tragedy happens. But you can't blame the firearm for that. What you can blame is the lack of rugged individualism in our country anymore, where we feel that we need to coddle our children, tell them they're special, important, and the best thing ever, and we never give them a dose of reality. We never tell them, hey, you're going to fail more than you succeed. You aren't the best at everything. Sometimes life is hard, and sometimes you're just going to lose, and there's nothing you can do about it. And I think if we did that a little more with our children and give them a dose of reality, this isn't going to crush their self-esteem. It's just going to make them a better person. Why do we need to coddle our children's self-esteem? How many psychopaths and serial killers do you know that don't think they're the best thing ever? There aren't many of them. There aren't many kids with low self-esteems going out there and killing people. It's the kids who find nothing but esteem in themselves and realize that it's unfounded, then they lose it. So I think maybe a little bit more time for parents to give a little dose of realism to their children might also help this situation. Maybe that's just me, but that's how I feel. I think some more solutions would be, let's stop stigmatizing firearms. Let's not glorify them, but let's call them what they are. These are tools used for sport shooting, killing animals, or personal defense. And any kid should be taught that a firearm isn't a bad thing, but it's the simple fact that it's a thing used only when you need to defend your life, and never just to take a life out of no reason. And we think these things are just assumed, but I'm telling you, in this day and age, kids get all this flood of information in the modern connected world where we have all the internet and all this information just free flowing, and it's really hard to sort the wheat from the chaff. So the kids get all these different signals, and they never really learn the true thing. And again, I think it all comes back to parenting, where the parents need to tell their kids, look, the only time you should ever point a gun at someone is like a cop when you when a cop is worried for his life, or you're worried for your life, because the only time you take a life is in defense of your own, and that's it. And if we push that into our kids and teach them proper firearm responsibilities, I think the occurrence of this kind of situation would just drop so dramatically. And maybe that's just my opinion, but I don't know. I really just think it would. So my conclusion on all this is there is no legislation needed. Okay? Legislation or not, these tragedies would have happened. People that are going to snap and shoot a person or do something horrible are going to do it, one way or another. Let's be real here, not to be graphic or just violent for the sake of it, but I could walk into an elementary school this Monday with a spike hammer through a baseball bat and kill 20 kids. I wouldn't need a gun to do it. Okay? I could grab an axe out of my shed and do it. I don't need a gun. And most grown men wouldn't. So it's not the gun. Okay, these people are going to snap. Maybe if we had a little bit better of a grasp on the mental health of our country, it would be better. But the way not to do that is we can't make some registry with doctors violating HIPAA and feeding our government information either. The best thing we can do is use our schools to maybe weed out the trouble kids a little early and say, hey, look, these kids, in school now are being bullied, are having trouble adjusting to the situation they're in. They don't seem to handle the day-to-day all too well. They're lone wolves, because usually it's the same old story every time. Oh, he was a lone wolf and kind of a strange kid, but we never thought he would do this. Well, maybe if we started taking the lone wolves and the strange kids and not singling them out, but just saying, hey, let's keep an eye on these guys and let's start, let's try to, just in maybe our single classrooms, try to allow for them to have a little bit of a say and maybe foster some of their independent nature in a good way with maybe projects or things like that they can really get behind, like the Columbine kids. If you'd have told them to write some 10-page book report on whatever they were into, and some kids will get behind that kind of thing. I'm not saying it's the perfect solution, but if we always hear the same scenario, and I'm like, if it's that simple, if every kid is just this lone wolf who, was a little different than the other kids, then why don't we just keep an eye on those, and as teachers, mentors, and parents, try to connect and say, hey, look, I know this is hard because you're their parent and you don't want to hear this, but we're a little worried about Johnny because he's kind of an odd one. He's kind of off on his own and stuff, and he doesn't get a lot of respect from the other kids. And we would like to foster some kind of positivity training, or maybe just in a roundabout way, just kind of let him know that he's still an individual, and that's what's really cool to be. Fitting in with the crowd isn't always what it's made up to be, and only individuals actually make something of themselves, like an Einstein or a Tesla or whoever. Give them a mentor. In conclusion, no legislation is needed. We can handle this on our own as a society. Why carrying deters is guns aren't going away. You take away guns, and I know everyone's heard this argument, but it's just a fact. You take away guns, criminals are still going to have them. Even if you destroyed every gun in the history of the country, some little machine shop's going to start spitting them out for $400 a piece or something under the table, and there's still going to be guns around. And let's look at it realistically here for my last point. Cops and military are just men. They're no different than I or you or anyone else. These men have the same... Police officers are known to commit crimes in the same percentages as all other American citizens. So are military members. These are human beings with the same minds, hearts, and feelings as us. They're no different. So they are no more trustworthy with a gun in their hand than I am or anyone else. We cannot hold these people up on a pedestal. We can respect them for their position and what they do for us, but we can't hold them up on a pedestal and say they're some kind of better human being. They are not. So cops and military personnel shouldn't be the only people to have guns, because let's look at it this way. When only the leaders and the criminals have guns, it leaves all us, the middlemen, in a bad spot, in a really tight position where who's to say, local police officer Hank isn't some corrupt criminal that you just don't know it, or that that whatever official we put into power isn't going to use the military in some way that's inconceivable, and that we only wish we would have had the ability to fight back, maybe dying doing so because the military is so much more powerful than us. But I can tell you now, I'd rather die with a gun in my hand fighting not to be thrown in some kind of camp or to be executed than just go like a lamb to the slaughter. So maybe you disagree, maybe you don't. You're always more welcome to post an opinion on here or anything. I have no problem with that. But so guns are okay. They're not the problem in this country. They are really not the problem. The violence is a direct cause of a coddling of our children, lack of parental supervision, lack of proactive steps taken by school officials and people like that who fail to see that these kids are endangered or are going to be dangerous, or just simply kind of lacking behind in the social structure. Gang and drug violence, which is a whole different topic, and I mean, human nature is human nature. We are savage brutes. We wouldn't be at the top of the food chain without our wits and our brute savagery. That's what got us here. And it's hard to take away a million years of evolution from an advanced primate and say, stop hurting each other, when that's what we've done our entire existence. So yeah, I mean, if you have any thoughts or questions, just get back to me.